For art, the clown, every moment is an act of total transgression, and the idea of a point of no return is completely irrelevant, as he never seems to have been on a path different from the one he treads. He never had a good to which he could return. His worldview is already, from the outset, completely distorted and alien to human morality. He sees the universe as a playground for his cruelty, where social rules, laws of morality, and limits of decency simply do not apply. For him, every encounter, every new victim, is an opportunity for a new spectacle, a new performance that redefines the limits of what is acceptable, bearable, and comprehensible to others. Art doesn't care about morality, ethics, or human conventions. He operates in a dimension where these concepts simply don't exist or are viewed as weaknesses or mere obstacles to be circumvented. His rationalizations for his actions are not verbal. They are visual and visceral. He delights in the chaos he creates, terrorizing his victims before disposing of them in unimaginable ways. There's a clear and undeniable satisfaction in seeing the fear, pain, and despair in others' eyes, a validation of his own existence through the suffering he causes. It's as if the pain of others is the oxygen he breathes, the essential fuel for his tireless malevolence. The dilemma for the viewer is profoundly disturbing and uncomfortable. What if he's right? What if morality is just a fragile social construct that art, in his pure and unshakable malevolence, simply ignores or transcends by being beyond it? He doesn't act for a discernible end goal, such as world domination, personal revenge, or accumulating wealth. He acts out of pure, intrinsic pleasure in disorder and destruction. This forces us to question the very nature of disinterested evil. Is it possible for the human mind to reach a state so disassociated from reality and empathy that it views the suffering of others as art or mere entertainment without any burden of conscience? Or is art the manifestation of something even more primal, an instinct of chaos residing in the darkest corners of the collective psyche, waiting for a chance to manifest and disrupt order? This absence of a human motivation makes him infinitely more terrifying and difficult to combat. There's no negotiating, arguing, appealing to his humanity, or trying to make him change, because he doesn't possess it in the way we understand it. He is the pure act of malevolence, without cause, without remorse, and, seemingly, without end. As we delve deeper into the psychological analysis of Art the Clown, we realize that his actions, however heinous, make sense within a perverse and calculated logic. Although he may seem chaotic and driven by insane impulses, there is a disturbing method to his madness, an intricate planning that demonstrates intact cognition, yet completely devoid of any affection, compassion, or moral consideration. He is not an irrationally enraged being, or simply insane in the traditional sense. He is a highly functional and sadistic predator who revels in every step of the process of terrifying, controlling, and ultimately eliminating his victims. We can use studies on high-functioning psychopathy to try to understand his behavior. Individuals with this profile often display superficial charm, manipulative intelligence, and a remarkable ability to plan and execute complex acts, combined with a total absence of empathy, guilt, or fear. They are masters at mimicking normal emotions and behaviors to achieve their goals, although art subverts this mimicry into terrifying parodies. Art, though silent, demonstrates a cold and calculating intelligence in setting his traps, choosing his victims, and interacting with them in ways that maximize terror and despair, indicating a distorted but effective understanding of human psychology and how to exploit its weaknesses. He knows how to break the spirit before dealing with the body. His ability to return after suffering injuries that would be lethal to any other human being, such as being dismembered or shot, can be interpreted, metaphorically, as the resilience and immortality of the very concept of pure, unmotivated malevolence. Just as deeply rooted ideas and fears in the collective, Psyche can persist and resurface even after being confronted and seemingly defeated. Art continues to appear, suggesting that the evil he represents is inherent, resilient, and incredibly difficult to eradicate. Compared to iconic characters like the Joker, who also embrace chaos and anarchy, Art distinguishes himself by his complete absence of verbalization or a story to justify his actions. He doesn't need a grand why or a complex philosophy. The act of causing suffering itself is the purpose, the ultimate reward. He validates his behavior through the reactions of his victims, using the terror he instills as the sole measure of his success and the sole form of his existence. It wasn't madness. It was cold calculation, wrapped in a macabre and eternal smile, a mind operating on a frequency of terror that few can comprehend. After Art the Clown's passage, what remains is a trail of unimaginable disorder and a profound sense of disturbance that infiltrates the very perception of safety in the world. The legacy of chaos he leaves behind is not only manifest in the lives he directly impacts, the victims he encounters, but more insidiously in the way he molds the world around him, a place where the most extreme and meaningless malevolence can emerge from nowhere, without reason, without explanation, defying all our expectations of logic, order, and justice. He forces us to confront the fragility of personal security, the randomness of adversity, and our powerlessness in the face of a faceless and apparently purposeless evil. The consequences of his actions are not just physical mutilated bodies and unforgettable scenes of terror etched into memory. They are profoundly psychological, reverberating in the fear, uncertainty, and paranoia he instills in anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path, survive him, or simply hear his stories. He doesn't seek fame, public recognition, or a cult following. His work is self-sufficient, performed for his own perverted and enigmatic satisfaction. Art's existence challenges our social structures, our justice systems, and our own psychological constructs of who the villain is and why they act. If a being can operate with such cruelty, with such coldness, and without an apparent motive, without a clear history of trauma or a comprehensible purpose that we can rationalize, then who are we to judge based on our own notions of cause and effect, of good and evil? Where is the limit of the human when confronted with the inhuman? His figure leads us to a deep philosophical and moral reflection. Art represents evil in its purest and most dehumanized form, an entity that exists only to disturb, to destroy, to disintegrate, without needing logic, history, or a narrative to make him comprehensible. He is a mirror to humanity's most primitive fears, the fear of the unknown, the uncontrollable, the inexplicable, of malevolence that cannot be contained or understood. He personifies the idea that disorder and malevolence are inherent forces in the universe, and that no matter how much we try to control them, understand them, or contain them, they will always find a way to manifest, whether in a dark street or in the deepest recesses of the human mind. But perhaps he was not the last to make us question the very nature of malevolence, and perhaps the fear he sows is, in a way, his most enduring and invisible artwork perpetuated in our collective memory. Art the Clown drags us into the abyss of the mind, where the absence of motive is what is most disturbing. He's not just a clown who terrorizes. He is a mirror to our own difficulty in comprehending malevolence in its rawest and most incomprehensible form. His silent and horrifying presence leaves us with a grim reflection. Could the greatest terror not be what affects us, but rather what defies our comprehension, existing only for disorder, without logic, without remorse? The next time you see a smile, ask yourself, what does it truly hide? And what does that say about the fears we carry? He doesn't speak. He shows no mercy. And he seems to delight in the suffering of others in a way that defies human comprehension. But what truly lies behind Art the Clown's horrifying smile? Is he just a terror character, or the representation of a deep psychological disorder that might make us question the very nature of malevolence. Prepare to delve into the darkest corners of the mind and discover the true logic behind the chaos. In the grim and, in some ways, raw universe of Terrifier art, the clown emerges not from an obvious personal tragedy or a revealed traumatic event, but from a disconcerting informational void. He simply appears, as if materializing from the very fabric of darkness on Halloween night, bringing with him an aura of pure, inexplicable anarchy. Unlike many horror antagonists who have complex backstories, troubled childhoods, traumatic experiences, ancient curses, or clear motivations for their actions, for Art, none of this is explicitly provided. This absence of a conventional origin is, in itself, one of the first intriguing and disturbing psychological traits, the representation of a primary malevolence, devoid of any rational motivation or apparent cause. He doesn't seem to have been made or become. He simply is a force of dark nature. In a world where our human minds constantly search for patterns, causes, and effects to make sense of the inexplicable, Art subverts this fundamental need. He acts not out of revenge, greed, ideology, or even a desire for power in the traditional sense. He is driven by an intrinsic and visceral pleasure in disorganization, pain, and the suffering of others. His preferred environment isn't a lair or a hideout, but the very darkness of night, empty alleys, abandoned buildings, and the isolation of his victims, places where civility crumbles and social norms are most tenuous, where despair can flourish unwitnessed. It's in this setting that his true essence is revealed, without restrictions or masks beyond his makeup. Psychologically, we could interpret him as the personification of extreme sociopathy, where the absence of empathy and remorse reaches absolute levels, almost unattainable for most human beings. He shows no signs of social consciousness, guilt, fear of punishment, or any genuine emotional connection. His satisfaction seems to come from the violation of everything considered human, dignified, and moral. He is a detached, almost academic, observer of his victims' emotions, like a macabre scientist conducting a bizarre experiment, recording their reactions with that frozen smile. Art seems to be in his element when disorder reigns, using disturbing silence and exaggerated, caricatured body language to communicate wordless cruelty, making him even more enigmatic and terrifying. The lack of dialogue forces the audience to project their own deepest fears and uncertainties onto him, turning him into a perfect vessel for pure, irrational dread. But there was something no one saw coming: the extent of his capacity to disturb and the nature of his persistence. For Art, the clown, the idea of a moment of rupture or a trigger is fundamentally subverted, as he seems to exist already in a state of total and irreversible psychological disintegration. His transformation isn't a linear event we can pinpoint in time, like an incident that changed him forever. It is rather a continuous state of being and operating, a constant manifestation of his nature. What makes him begin to transform, or rather, to deepen into his innate malevolence, is each new victim, each new meticulously orchestrated act of cruelty. It's as if each heinous act feeds him, not only reinforcing his nature, but also refining his style of causing disorder, pain, and terror, making him increasingly efficient in his purpose. Art's conflict is not internal. He doesn't struggle against his dark impulses or question his actions, for there is no voice of conscience to restrain him. His mind appears to be a monolith of malevolent intent, with no room for doubt or remorse. His conflict is therefore entirely external, directed at the world and at the very idea of order, decency, and humanity. He finds a morbid pleasure in breaking social barriers, in defying morality, and in deconstructing the individuality and dignity of his prey. The tension doesn't lie in his internal struggle, as there is no apparent struggle, but in the overwhelming tension he imposes on his victims, who are forced to confront a form of malevolence so pure, unwavering, and purposeless that it defies all comprehension. Psychology would attempt to explain this absence of an apparent trigger in several ways. We could speculate about an extreme innate condition, perhaps the peak of a severe antisocial personality disorder, where the neurological structure governing empathy, the recognition of others' emotions, and the formation of social bonds is gravely compromised from birth. In such cases, the person doesn't transform into something. They are already born with a genetic or neurological predisposition for certain behavior patterns devoid of compassion. Art has no internal conflict because there is no voice of conscience or sense of morality to restrain him. He is purely reactive to the opportunity to exercise control and chaos, viewing the suffering of others not as something to be avoided or lamented, but as a form of entertainment, a desired outcome, or even an essential tool for his macabre art. He is the representation of the most feared danger, one who acts without apparent logic, without emotional weaknesses, thus becoming unpredictable and, therefore, inescapable. And it was there that everything began to unravel, for everyone who crossed his path without warning or explanation. Art the Clown's distorted mind doesn't mold conventionally through learning or trauma. It reveals itself in every gesture, every silent expression, and every meticulously choreographed act of cruelty. He doesn't need words or monologues to express his new way of thinking, as his actions are his most eloquent and brutal language. And within them, we perceive an evolution of his malevolence that goes far beyond the mere desire to inflict harm. There's a perverted logic and sadistic intelligence in his approach, a macabre structure that resembles an artist refining his technique, striving for perfection in his grotesque art of terror. Art draws the audience into his mind, not through words, but through his horrifying staging. He doesn't merely eliminate his victims. He turns them into part of a personal spectacle, pieces in his macabre gallery of horrors. Observe how he interacts with them, the playful and comical gestures before the most shocking acts, the way he uses everyday objects for terrifying purposes, transforming the mundane into the dreadful. This suggests not just sadistic pleasure and a profound disregard for life, but a completely distorted view of the world as a stage where he is the sole protagonist and director, and others are mere extras or props in his horror play. Every scene is meticulously composed, every scream, a note in his symphony of terror. He is an architect of dread. We can use scientific analogies to try and understand this mindset. Depersonalization and derealization are psychological conditions where the individual feels a deep disconnection from their own reality or self, as if they are mere observers of their own lives. In art, this disconnection is projected outward and applied to his victims. He doesn't recognize others' lives as valuable or pain as something to be avoided, because, for him, the reality of other people is merely a distorted projection of his own sick and sadistic fantasy. He is a master manipulator of fear, using black humor, grotesque mimes, and silence as tools for psychological control and torture, a way to dehumanize his victims before disposing of them. The idea that he returns after suffering injuries that would be fatal to any other being suggests a persistence that transcends physical and biological logic, reinforcing the notion that his essence is beyond common comprehension, perhaps an immortal personification of inevitable chaos or an archetypal evil that cannot be easily stopped. But the true monster was still dormant, in the imagination of those who observed him and tried to make sense of the inexplicable.